Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Susan Murnan, and I am the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's forum on the relationship between the Cleveland Police and Cleveland's community, where we have been, what we have learned in the past 2 years, and where we hope to go. Most of you know of League of Women Voters as the nonpartisan political membership organization that publishes the election guides you used to pick up at the grocery store and organizes candidate forums. But our broader goal is to empower citizens to shape better communities. In that regard, we seek to engage communities in promoting positive solutions to public policy issues through education and advocacy. One of our long-standing positions seeks improved police-community relations. I have a request. I have an ask for you. League of Women Voters is an all-volunteer organization, and we frequently find that our reach exceeds our grasp. We desperately need volunteers to help us to observe the Cleveland Community Police Commission. That would involve attending commission, committee, and other meetings, and monitoring important issues and developments so that we may keep the work of the commission in the public eye and help it to achieve its potential in the community. If you are willing to help us with this work, or if you know anybody who is willing to help us, you can get in touch with me or Mike Barron, who is in the back of there after this meeting, or you can contact us through our website at leagueofwomenvoters.greatercleveland.org. We desperately need help on this mission. I want to also call your attention to another public policy forum, which is coming up in the very near future. On Thursday, this Thursday, November 17th, 2016, at the Cleveland Heights University Heights Public Library, 2345 Lee Road, between 7 and 8:30 p.m., we will have another forum, this time on sports stadium financing in Cleveland. The panelists are Len Komorowski, who is CEO of the Cleveland Cavaliers and Quicken Loans Arena, Peter G. Patakos, lawyer, who's a lawyer and a sports fan, and Tom Chema, who's president of the Gateway Consultants Group. We hope you will come out to this forum also. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our co-sponsor, or Dr. Tim Black, who is, you are our co-sponsor, right? A co-sponsor, one of our co-sponsors, Dr. Tim Black, who's acting director of the CWRU Social Justice Institute. Thank you very much.
Hello. How's everybody? So yes, I'm Tim Black. I am the acting director of the Social Justice Institute, and yes, we are a co-sponsor of the event tonight. Dr. Rhonda Williams, who's on the panel, is the founder and the director of the Social Justice Institute, and she is on sabbatical this semester, making a rare appearance tonight on the university campus. Social Justice Institute, we create spaces for faculty, staff, community members, students come together for education purposes and to do social justice work. We have a lot of events that are coming up in November and December, and next year please visit our website if you're interested. We will have an event coming up in the beginning of December to talk about to do a sort of post-election analysis and talk about directions for moving forward. So please, that's in the planning stage right now, so please keep your eyes open for that. Tonight's program addresses the relationship between the city police and the community. But before I introduce tonight's moderator, I want to recognize and thank a few organizations who were especially instrumental in making this year's public policy series possible. Our program partners are the Laura and Alvin Segal Lifelong Learning Program at Case Western Reserve University, a la Susan, the League of Women Voters, Cleveland.com, the Cuyahoga County Public Library, and the Lakewood Public Library. Tonight's session is also, as Susan mentioned, co-sponsored by the Social Justice Institute, and we are grateful for our corporate sponsor, First Interstate Properties, LTD, for supporting the series. We will be passing out note cards, which I believe we're doing right now, for the question and answer portion of the evening's program. Please write out your questions on the note cards, and the staff will collect the cards and bring them to the panel during the Q&A session. So it's with great pleasure that we welcome Mark Naymik, Metro reporter, Cleveland.com, to the podium this evening. Mark will introduce all of our panelists. Mark Naymik is a reporter at the Plain Dealer who has covered city, county, and state politics since 2001. Before joining the Plain Dealer, he worked for alternative weekly newspapers in Cleveland and Philadelphia. Mark develops and evaluates public polls and collaborates with news and web editors to help growth of online content and social media. He delivers speeches to civic groups on state politics and community issues and hosts forums at such venues as the City Club. Mark appears regularly on local and national radio and television programs, including WVIZ Idea Stream and WKYC Channel 3, and he has appeared on CNN, CBS, and NPR. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mark Naymik.
Hey, thanks. I can never live up to such introductions. I mean, I'm always just a local reporter, and if you read the comments on Cleveland.com, hack or whatever else you like. So I appreciate the kind words. I'll make this brief. I want to get to the issues at hand. I'm only going to just introduce the panelists by name and going to let them give a couple of minute introduction, if they like, about their background as it relates to the city and community policing, and then I will, come back and we'll get this discussion going. This is a discussion. We're not here to debate. We're not here to try to corner or pick on any individual. We want to keep the issues going. We have a lot to talk about, everything from really the impact and potential impact of a new presidency on the U.S. Justice Department and how that relates. We have had a lot of big ideas coming out in Cleveland, like a proposal by Mayor Jackson to build a dirt bike track in the inner city, which is very much a part of the larger picture of community policing. We have very much, we're just getting started in the consent decree. That's the deal between the city and the U.S. Justice Department about how to improve the police department's inner workings as well as the relationship with the city. So we can touch, we will touch on that quite a bit. So there's a lot here. So let me start by introducing Blaine Griffen, who is head of community development, and I'll let him take a minute or two to talk a little bit about his role with the city and connection to community policing, and then we'll move on down the line.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. And I also like to thank Case Western Reserve and the League of Women Voters for putting on this forum today. It is definitely an important forum. It's a forum that we welcome at the City of Cleveland, always to truly and have true engagement with our citizens. Like Mark said, my name is Blaine Griffen. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Relations Board. But before I go any further about the Community Relations Board and the City of Cleveland and the mission and Mayor Jackson's administration and what we intend to do, I first and foremost am a father of 3 young children in the Buckeye Shaker neighborhood of the city of Cleveland. I'm also a husband of 20 years, of the same woman for 20 years. I don't have 3 different wives, but I've had one for 20 years. And the reason that I tell you that is because first and foremost, before I am anything else, before I wear a city title, before I wear any other title that I have, I am a son of this community. I see my mentor here today, the person who I first started working with in the city of Cleveland, Paul Hill. So the former director of East End Neighborhood House. I'm rooted in Cleveland's neighborhood. So this job is just that to me. It is a job, but what I bring is my true passions to the job job that I have. The Community Relations Board in the city of Cleveland is the oldest government-funded human relations committee in the United States of America. So I have the distinct privilege of working for the Community Relations Board for the city of Cleveland. It was originally put in place to deal with race relations, to deal with the surge of African Americans coming from the South into Cleveland's neighborhoods, the ethnic groups that were converging upon Cleveland. So our job was to try to build amicable relationships in the city of Cleveland. As we went through time, we began to deal with some of the critical issues like schools and busing and those type of issues, the civil rights issues of our days, and yes, of course, police, community relations. Many of our committees that we've had in place have been in place for 35 years or more, actually going on about 40 years now, since the Voinovich administration, where people have come together to try to make sure that they've had dialogue around police community relations. So Cleveland has a rich history of police community relations, but fast forward to our recent days. In addition to having a surge in urban crime and poverty and disinvestment and all of the other things that we see in our communities, we've also had some police-involved shootings that have shaken our collective conscience. Nobody can be shy about that. That is something that has really shaken all of our collective conscience in City Hall and throughout the community. And one of the first things that Mayor Jackson did when he came in the office under the Jackson administration is put in a new use of force policy. It was the first policy that he put in place when he came into City Hall. Since then, because of these incidents that took place, Mayor Jackson, along with several other community leaders and civil rights organizations, saw it fit to seek out help from the U.S. Department of Justice so that we can have a road to reform. And that's why we're here today, to really try to make sure that we can help you understand that we are truly committed to our road to reform, and that we are really, most and foremost, sons and citizens of this community who are very passionate about the success of Cleveland.
Thank you, Blaine. And now I'll turn it over to Deputy Chief Deon McCaulley, and he's been around a long time too, and has a connection to the city of Cleveland as a former head of, was it 4th District? And I believe also a Glenville resident?
That's correct.
All right, so take it away.
All right, thank you, Mark, and I appreciate the invitation to be here today. I'm certainly not as interesting as Blaine as I sat here and listened to his bio. But let me share with you some of the things that I've done. I'm born, raised, educated, and worshiped in the city of Cleveland and rooted in the city of Cleveland. I've raised 3 sons in the city and married to a police officer who is the detective sergeant in the 5th District. So I do have an interest in what happens in the future of our community. My background is I've been a police officer for going into my 27th year. I've served basically on the east side of town, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and also the 6th District when it was in existence. About 5 years ago, prior to 5 years ago, I was a commander of community policing, and that was one of my passions in police work because I had the opportunity to work with young people and also with the seniors and working with them in order to formulate crime prevention strategies and to make sure that they were safe and able to enjoy the amenities of our city. After community policing, after being the commander of community policing, I moved to the 4th District, which you guys know as the southeast side of Cleveland, where I served there for about 5 years. And I created the relationships that are needed in order to have effective and safe policing in the city. So I'm very proud of the relationships that we forged when I was in the 4th District. And that just does not only take place in the 4th District, but across our city as well. But I just want to say that I'm very happy to be here today. Any conversation around improved relations with the community and the police, I want to be a part of that conversation. And I just appreciate you having me here today.
Thank you. Now I want to bring up Dr. Rhonda Williams, who has a lot of connections as well, both to the street through her activism. She's still co-chair on community relations, community commission. Sorry, and she's going to give us a little presentation on community policing. I think, as you'll see, definitions of community policing vary. You can go from city to city. They look at it different, right? It could be everything from the ice cream social to the DARE program to much more serious outreaches we've seen in Cleveland, particularly around the violence last year, police shootings, and we'll let her get into it a little bit more. And then I'll come back. We already have got questions from the audience, so we will get to those shortly. Thank you.
How's everybody? All right. So I'm Rhonda Williams. People in community call me, many people in community, not everybody, but many people in community call me Dr. Rhonda. I'm the founder and director of the Social Justice Institute here at Case Western Reserve University, and I've lived in Cleveland for almost 20 years now. I'm also a co-chair of the Cleveland Community Police Commission, and I can tell you a little bit more about the commission maybe as we do kind of the Q&A. What I wanted to do was to kind of give a brief presentation on what do we mean by community policing. Oh, I left my little clicker. I don't know that I'll need the clicker, but. And as Mark said, there's so many different versions of what community policing is. And when I travel around the country and I talk to people about police reform and community policing, and I talk about, we're trying to establish community policing, or that's one of the paradigms for Cleveland, folks will say, we don't want community policing, we don't want that. And so I'm having conversations with them about, well, why is it they don't want community policing? And it's because they have a certain view of community policing that comes out of something different than what I'm talking about when I say I want to have community policing to try to transform, not just reform, but kind of transform relations between police and community, so that ultimately the goal is actually you need less police than more police. So not all forms of community policing are made equal, okay? So what we don't want is broken windows policing. And this is when you say community policing to people in community, this is what they often think about. They think about Bill Bratton, they think about New York, they think about the way it's traveled across the country, the way it's traveled around the globe, the way it's connected to policing behavior and disorderly conduct, the ways in which it amplifies community police contact in a way that is focused on certain kinds of infractions and certain kinds of communities that are usually racial and ethnically minority communities, that are poor communities. So that really focus on minor violations and really don't deal with crime in terms of violence that really people want to see disappear from their communities and have safety and security. So broken windows policing is a concept that kind of really emerged and spread, not just initially emerged, but emerged and spread in the 1990s. It focuses on nuisance and minor violations. It often targets poor people in deindustrialized cities. It targets racial minorities and utilizes stop and frisk, which is a prime strategy that unfortunately has embedded within it racial profiling and the targeting, again, of racial minorities, racial and ethnic minorities. It increases behavioral control functions, selling loosies on the street, and what that could mean in terms of just stop selling the loosies versus ending up like, for instance, Eric Garner. It often brings about more policing that creates more surveillance, and people in community are often very concerned about surveillance. So when you talk about community policing, there are many folks who say, we don't want more and more police and be more and more surveilled. And what does that mean? And what's the technology? What's the equipment they're bringing in? They don't share that kind of information. And so again, these are various kinds of concepts about how community policing has been manifested in many communities and what people think about it. And the success has often been judged based on arrest statistics, right? And not necessarily changing people's actual conditions, right? A couple resources if you want to find out more information, because I'm moving fast, because I'm, the one with the PowerPoint, and kind of asked them last night, can I do a PowerPoint? Because I really want to break open a little bit what community policing is. But a couple of resources for you to really kind of understand the broken windows theory of community policing that really kind of come out of the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, again, really expands in the 1990s, is a book called Policing the Planet. and to also understand how that's related to the question around surveillance, the diminishment of rights, the undermining of rights, and the militarization of police, which is the other thing that people also began to hear when they hear community policing. You're going to put more police in our communities, is the rise of the warrior cop, right? So let's think about then community problem-oriented policing, because that's the way I like to talk about it. That's the way that people are thinking about more advanced reforms and even the potential of transformation of police-community relations that would lead to the ultimate diminishment or lesser need for more police in communities. This is kind of what they are talking about in the context of having a community or having a society that actually has police in it, right? So the definition is being guided by and partnering with community to identify and solve the underlying causes of persistent problems, right? So if you got somebody selling loosies on the street, arresting that one person selling loosies is not going to necessarily get rid of the problem of why it is people are selling loosies on the street, right? So it's really a different kind of paradigmatic shift of what we begin to think about in terms of problem-oriented policing. So being guided by and partnering with communities to identify and solve the underlying causes of persistent problems, and promoting investments in people and community infrastructure that advances quality of life, the livability of communities and neighborhoods, and human dignity and respect. So, some critical elements for community problem-oriented policing. It has to be a guiding organizational philosophy, right? Not an event, not a moment in time, but a guiding organizational philosophy. It's embedded throughout the culture of the police department, right, and the policing apparatus. It's not just cordoned off into one specific bureau or area, though that could exist to amplify and enhance, but the idea is that it drives the culture itself, right? It prioritizes human dignity and respect. You can't say that enough. So prioritizes human dignity, respect, human dignity, respect, human dignity, respect, okay? Values people and community no matter where they live or who they are. Often in community, I've heard folks say, treat me like you would treat folks in Pepper Pike. Treat me like you would treat folks in Beechwood. Treat me like, et cetera, right? And so the idea of community problem-oriented policing has that as an undergirding philosophy. It's guided by and working with and accountable to the community. So the concept of community problem-oriented policing actually has closer ties to community control of policing than it does to, it's definitely different from broken windows policing. Developing alternative solutions to persistent problems that are not reliant on arrest or enforcement as the first model. Okay, so that's community problem-oriented policing. Let me tell you what community problem-oriented policing is not reducible to. It is not reducible to school resource officers. It is not reducible to a grant. It is not reducible to storefront police substations. It is not reducible to a pilot program in a single area of town. It is not reducible to playing pickup games of basketball. It is not reducible to foot or bicycle patrols. It is not reducible to a specialized unit of neighborhood police officers or a citizens police academy. These could be tools, but community problem-oriented policing is not reducible to these, because community problem-oriented policing is about transforming and dealing with the underlying conditions that bring on the persistent problems. And actually, these came from the Lincoln Police Department in Lincoln, Nebraska. Some of these came from different places. Cincinnati is an example, and I'll try to move quickly, just 2 slides, this one and the next one. In 2015, early 2015, I actually, as a member of the Collaborative for a Safe, Fair, and Just Cleveland, took a trip down to Cincinnati with Dr. Ronnie Dunn to actually visit a hearing they were having. The Ohio Task Force on Police was having a hearing, and so I went down just to kind of sit in on that, but also to meet with Iris Rowley, who's an activist down in Cincinnati, who played a role in the collaborative agreement down in Cincinnati with the police department, in which the United Black Front actually had a standing in the case down there, and actually had power, just like the parties have here. The Community Police Commission does not have standing. We are created out of the consent decree, but the Black United Front had standing. So just like the city could say stop and the DOJ could say stop, the Black United Front in Cincinnati could say stop, right? And that's not the setup here. But so I met with them down there, and under former Chief Jeffrey Blackwell, I had a chance to meet with him, myself and Ronnie Dunn, and learn about some of the things they were doing down there. I'm not sure how much of this is still in play because he's no longer their police chief. But one of the things he said to us while we were down there is, and he said in the newspaper as well, this is a quote from the newspaper, "We want our police officers to be guardians of this community and not warriors." He says, so we put service before the protection part so that they learn the primary function of their jobs is to serve the city. One of the things that they did, where you see new recruits, community service, they had a set of recruits that came out of the academy. And one of the things that they did was before they even went on the street to start to patrol communities, they actually had to go out and do service. They actually had to go work with young people. They had to go work with seniors. This is some of the echoes you might hear Deon saying, and love to learn more about some of the things that happened underneath of him. But actually had to go and meet community and understand that they were serving the community. They were protecting the community. They were not just policing and enforcing the community, right? And that there were problems that the community had that they needed to understand more about. They did this also through kind of a homeless encampment and resettlement versus raid. So one of the examples that the chief gave us was that instead of going in and raiding homeless settlements, just kind of moving homeless people off, right? Shunning them into shelters or just getting them off the street or arresting them or whatever, they went in to find out like what was going on with the homeless people who were in those encampments. What were their concerns? What were their problems? Did they have substance abuse problems? Did they just like lose their home? Did they not make enough money? And really began to work with other people in community, the community and other people in community and government agencies to find a solution so they would not have to live under the bridge. And they protected their stuff while they did that, right? So they just didn't pick it up and kind of toss it like it's happened in New York, just put it in the back of a trash truck and crush it and tell people to go away. They actually protected their stuff and then actually helped them find places to live, jobs, all those other kinds of things as part of an example. So the optimal and ultimate goals, and then I'm going to sit down. Y'all good? Everybody good? Okay. I work on call and response too. That might not be the right place for this, but that's what okay. So as long as you're good. Okay, so this is the last slide. So the optimal and ultimate goals are you build an infrastructure, an alternative system of solving community problems. You build an infrastructure and an alternative system of solving community problems. You invest money and resources in not simply hiring more police, but in community people and institutions, right? So, if you have $500,000, then could the $500,000 go into jobs or go into something in the community that would actually help to alleviate the underlying condition of crime or whatever the issue is that would then call for a less need for police, those kinds of things, right? So what do you do and how do you prioritize your money? It addresses broader material conditions. It transforms, the optimal and ultimate goal is to transform police-community relations, to increase community oversight and leadership, which is extremely important, to have safer neighborhoods, and ultimately to require less of a police presence. And so that's my last slide. So I just wanted to make sure that we were clear about, I'm going to go back to this so we have something pretty on the screen. Or it could be blank. Yeah, it's pretty, huh? Did it come back out? Okay, that's not the one I want. I want that one. So I wanted to make sure that we were clear when we're talking about community policing, have some common language of like what that means, or at least you have knowledge of what I mean when I say community problem-oriented policing versus community policing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rhonda. You covered a lot of ground, and a lot of what was on those slides are things that we're going to get into. I am surprised you didn't mention the words Rudy Giuliani, because he is in the news a lot lately, and the idea of the broken windows theory was something that he championed and then carried on into his 2008 presidential run, which at that point people had realized that actually was not a very effective tool and wasn't responsible for the reduction in crime in New York City. But I think I want to jump right now into Deputy Chief Deon to talk a little bit about the things they are doing related to community policing that do go beyond maybe more of the public relations side of it. It is worth noting that the city has made a very serious commitment to do even more than what the Justice Department required in its initial 105-page report about changing. For example, the two biggest things that jump out is the city of Cleveland is going to, they have committed to changing their search and seizure policies and really to dive into bias-free policing. The Justice Department did not address that, and that is an issue that is tied to all of the things I think that we just talked a bit about with Dr. Rhonda's presentation. So, Deputy Chief, if you want to take us through for a couple minutes of some of the things that the city is doing on the more serious side of community policing.
Okay, thank you. The city is committed to making sure that our officers have the training that they need in order to go out and be professional and to serve the public in the way that the public should actually be served. As Dr. Rhonda and you mentioned, Mark, there's going to be a number of trainings coming up in 2017 that's going to affect the way that we patrol, the way that we go out and police. And I'll talk about those in just a second. But I also want to underscore some of the things that Dr. Rhonda talked on a couple of seconds ago, and that's some of the things that we do in the neighborhood that I think are very important that also relate to training. Pizza with police is one of the things we do. Ice cream socials, fishing with police, reading in schools to our kids. These sound like very simple things, but not only does these things build a relationship with the people that we are serving, it changes the mindset of the police officer that's involved in that. And let me underscore that. That changes the mindset. So if I am a biased police officer and I'm sent out to interact in the schools and talk to young kids that might look differently than me, then I have the opportunity at that point to see people different than me in a different light. Whereas I may have had a mindset that certain groups are prone to criminal activity, I have an opportunity to see them differently. So that part of our community relations effort is very important because that's a training, an unofficial training that takes place with our officers. But in addition to that, we're going to make sure that our officers have the trainings that they need in de-escalation so that we're on scene of something that's happening that can be brought down to a more manageable level, that our officers have the tools that they need in order to bring that down to a more manageable level. We're going to talk about or train on biased-free policing and constitutional policing. One of my favorite trainings that has taken place and will continue to take place is policing the teen brain. And I don't know if you are aware of that training, but what it tells us is that the young adults' brains don't completely develop until they're about 25 years of age. So as a police officer, if I'm talking to a young person and I'm giving them directives, they may not be processing that information in the manner that I want them to process it. So what we're doing is we're making sure that our officers have that type of training so they have an understanding that there's certain buzzwords that you should not use and certain things that you should do in order to create a partnership with that person that you're trying to help. In addition to that, if I may go on just a little bit further, and to Dr. Rhonda's point, is just using prostitution as an example. We get complaints about prostitution all the time, and officers respond to that, and sometimes we take prostitutes into custody. Well, what we want to do as a department, just using that crime as an example, is to have our officers understand that there's a reason, or possibly a reason, or underlying reason, like Rhonda said, that prostitute might be out there. So jail might not necessarily be the best solution because they may be out there again next week. So we want to work with that individual in order to find a better solution for their life and to change the course of their life. But this is some of the efforts that are underway within the Cleveland Division of Police as we move into the next year.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. I'm trying to dovetail into some of the things that we've already set up. So we'll go to you, Blaine, on this question. And I'm going to try to work off of the audience questions. There's a lot of them here. And I may summarize them in a slightly different way to capture a couple of questions at once. But both Dr. Rhonda and Deputy Chief just talked about, this idea of community policing is to go beyond just, and should go beyond just, enforcement and being there. So Blaine, can you talk a bit about how the police and the city looks at this, that goes beyond the enforcement of the law, how you're trying to connect. So the question is that I'm trying to summarize is the primary purpose of the police is to serve the city versus the primary purpose to cultivate a relationship. So talk a bit about that.
Sure, and I'll try to answer it this way. I once had an interesting conversation with a chief of police out in Oakland, California, and he told me about a story that he once had a conversation, and he sat down with a former or a Black Panther. I guess once you're a Black Panther, you're always part of that Black Panther Party. And he said one of the things that he realized in that conversation is that the Black Panther Party didn't necessarily have a problem with the police. They had a problem with government and the inequity and inequalities and all of the different things that government in general was not providing to these communities. So when you talk about policing, policing only deals with the symptoms. It deals with the symptoms of a broader cause: poverty, economic opportunity, education. All of those different things are critical in order to address those in a holistic way before we even get to the point of dealing with police problems, not to even mention dealing with the issues of race relations and all of the other divisions and divisiveness that we have in our community. So before we even get to the issue of a uniform response to police situations, we have all of these other social indicators that we have to deal with: cultural identity, several other things. So what we've been doing with the city of Cleveland is that we've also tried to reform and address some of those issues. We have one of the most ambitious educational plans in the entire country and the entire United States that is yielding some results, slow, but it is yielding some results. We've done as much as we can to try to make sure that we have a community benefits agreement, which means that anytime economic development takes place in a community, that we have to show how the community benefits, whether it's housing, whether it's job and economic development, whether it's goods and services, whether it's beautification projects. How are the community going to benefit from this? So we've tried to deal with those other underlying factors that deal with the destabilization and the distrust that a lot of people have with government before we can even get to policing. And as you said before, we're going to talk about some of the non-traditional ways, and I'll wait for you to bring that question up. But we really deal with that because what a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of people, and I'll end with this, once had Director Comey, and I know a lot of people have issues with Director Comey, but Director Comey actually came to Cleveland and made a visit to us, and myself, Mayor Jackson, and Chief Williams had an opportunity to actually have a conversation with Director Comey, and he said, we're seeing this rise in violence and all of these different things happening around the country. We're also seeing this Ferguson effect, which makes a lot of some portions of the police department go crazy, which deals with social media recording police interaction with citizens. He said, but I cannot understand what's going on, why this is starting to come apart after years and decades of reducing crime and now we have all of these incidents taking place, and now we having these police involved shootings. And it was simple, and actually Mayor Jackson and I have had this conversation several times. We have a public that has been disaffected by government. We have a group of people that feel that nobody cares about them. We have a group of people that feel that there's not access to the room, whatever room that is. I'm still trying to find it myself, but the room where all of the decisions are made about society, but people don't have access. And then you also have people that have no faith in systems and institutions. So because of that destabilizing effect that you're talking about, we got to deal with some of those factors before we can even get to a healthy Cleveland community policing issue that Dr. Rhonda and others are talking about, because there's so many other social indicators that we have to address, even working our way to community policing.
Dr. Rhonda, if you want to add anything on that point before we get specific questions, go ahead.
I'm one of those people you're going to probably have to say, okay. So I just want to mention a couple things. This last question, but also one before. So one of the things that we talked about, or that was mentioned, was that I think Mark, maybe you mentioned it, that the Cleveland Division of Police, the city, is going far beyond what initially was thought to come out of the
goal,
right. So search and seizure and bias-free policing, right? Yeah. No, they haven't achieved it yet. Some of that's in the works. But I do, as a historian and as an activist in community, I do want to give some credit to community for forcing the issue in some ways on search and seizure and on bias-free policing. Those issues were consistently raised by community members themselves, and so I think that is one of the reasons why, and that's not to take anything away from the city saying they had to sign the consent decree, but some of the things that actually got into the consent decree were because community people actually pushed for them to be in there. That is also a way of my saying that community members need to stay engaged in the process consistently as we see this consent decree unfold, whether it's around bias-free policing, search and seizure, whether it's around the citizen or resident complaint process, because it's not as easy as it may seem when you start to see these policies unfold. There are debates that are going on. There are non-acceptance of some of the things that have been put forth, and then there's movement on that, and there's integration of it, and so this is a consistent struggle to make sure that we have the most progressive policies that emerge, and then how that transforms into actual programs and transforms into actual practice and cultural change. So I just need to say that. The other thing, as a historian, just real quick, is that the Black Panther Party was absolutely unenamored with police and police brutality in their communities. It was about government, but it was also about the police and the ways in which the police were policing in their communities and the ways in which they were treating people in their communities. And in fact, the Black Panther Party came together around one of the first cases that, one of the reasons they came together as the Black Panther Party was around something that happened with a young person in community, and some merit students said, okay, we're gonna come together. So we can't lose, the thing I'm saying is we can't lose that thread of the ways in which the police, certain police, not all police, right? But that the police have had a historic, there's been disaffection historically in the Black community, in minority communities with the police, and not for no good reasons. And so we have to come to grips with that, because we need to talk about cultural transformation. If we're thinking about kind of moments and we're thinking about just connected to crime, we're thinking about individual cases, and we're not going to get to the kind of systemic issues that we really need to deal with, and how that is connected to deindustrialization, how that's connected to questions around government, how's that connected to who is actually leading certain political offices, how that's connected to employment and education, those kinds of things. So I kind of wanted to also say that. We also need to think about the ways in which some police forces, and I don't know about that here in Cleveland, so I can't speak to Cleveland, but because Blaine raised the issue around the Ferguson effect, we need to get underneath of some of the mythologies and also some of the storylines that are actually emerging as well around why police may not police. Are police like actually having work stoppages and not calling them that? Are they not taking care of communities because people deign to stand up to them? Questions around tax generation and using the police force for generating tax revenue. Some of these issues are issues that continue to breed distrust in community. And so we have to deal with some of those issues as well as deal with what Deon is saying, and that is, how do we get people in touch more so they understand the humanity and dignity of people, and at the same time make sure we go beyond pizzas with police, coffee with police, ice cream with police, which are important to the degree that they actually can have impact on how people's minds are changed about who police are, who is Deon, right, McCaulley, who are the various police officers in our community, and how they might be able to change their perception of people in community. But that still doesn't get us to problem-oriented policing, right, which would shift the paradigm in terms of how we really think about the relationship between police and community. So I think that's important.
I appreciate it. And by the way, I'm looking at some earlier stories that I and my colleagues wrote, and in fact, on the point about search and seizure and bias-free policing, we actually note in the story that the Justice Department, these were not on the original list, but they were advanced to the forefront during a series of community meetings, and those were real, and there is examples of what came out of community input. All right, I'm going to try to jump into some specific things. We're going to try to keep this a little tighter so we can get to a lot of questions. Let's go to Deputy Chief. Talk a bit about and this is a question about the intervention training, and this is really the mental health response. We've written a lot about it. There's been some of this. This obviously is tied a lot to the Tanisha Anderson case. I'm not going to ask you specifics on that because I know the city's being sued over it, but what is going on as it relates to the intervention training and monitoring for health response issues?
Okay. Part of the training that I spoke of earlier that our officers will have to go through would be the crisis intervention training. Right now, officers that go through that training go through a 40-hour training where they're taught de-escalation techniques, and they're taught how to interact with folks that might be experiencing a mental crisis. In 2017, that will be part of our in-service training as well, where our officers will receive 16 hours of training. All of our frontline officers will receive 16 hours of training where they can have that ability to go and again receive the tools that they need in order to bring situations down. In addition to that training, we're going to have the bias-free police training, bias-free policing, the community and problem-oriented policing that Dr. Rhonda talked about. Search and seizure is going to be part of that training, and of course, use of force. So all of these trainings kind of interact with one another in order to accomplish what crisis intervention training is designed to do.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions on a somewhat related point, and that is, when will the officers get new equipment? Well, the city of Cleveland just passed an increase in the income tax, and a big part of the mayor and the city's push, and Blaine, you can jump in on this in a second, was that we needed money to implement the consent decree, which does talk about equipment, police officer levels, and one of the biggest things are computers in cars. And we have a story out there today that the city has accepted a grant to get some computer-equipped cars. Anybody that's driven in, or anybody that's been in the suburbs, you've seen police officers with, the laptops open right there. City of Cleveland hasn't had those. One of the beliefs is that by having that kind of information, perhaps the Tamir Rice case may have unfolded differently if, in fact, the transcript of a dispatch call could have been relayed to the computer screen of an officer, and the details about perhaps, he was playing with a gun, that there was implication that maybe this was a toy gun. All those kind of things, could be there to pull up, and that is one of the theories and the pushes. So the city is moving there, and now they can actually get to some of that equipment as a result of the tax increases, difficult as that is for everybody that has to pay that.
Well, I would say the tax increase, and then you also mentioned the grant that we just worked with Prosecutor McGinty in order to have cameras in all cars. But also, Cleveland has been on the forefront of being very innovative on some equipment ideas. For example, body cams. We were the largest city in the United States to adopt body cams, to make sure that everybody has body cams and have policies around officers having body cams. So when they have interactions with citizens, that actually is on tape now from body cams. So that's critical, and it's important, as several other folks said, to make sure that the right policies are in place to govern those body cams. But what's more important than all of that is really getting up to date with technology and have 21st century technology. Not only having computers in cars and access to better data, but officers didn't even have emails for a long time. So now every officer have emails. Every officer in the district have emails that they actually can communicate, receive interdepartmental notices, whereas they used to have to be read 3 times in roll call. Deon probably knows this as being a commander. You also have what I think is going to be the most unique, is a really good early warning system, that we actually will have technology that will actually flag early warning system if we see problems with officers, whether it's problems that they have several excessive force cases, if they have personal problems that can lead to them having excessive force. So really getting up to date with the technology and making it coordinate and line up with each other is critical, and that's one of the things that we plan on doing. So with addition to the tax dollars that we got, we also have been looking at how we can be more efficient with our communication strategy as well.
All right. I got several cards on this. This should be no surprise. And that is a question about the presidential election, and as it relates to the head of the police union, Steve Loomis, who endorsed Donald Trump, and a strong reaction from some members of those working on the consent decree that by taking such a stance with someone that is viewed as being so incendiary, that this is counterproductive to the goals that the city is trying. And some of the questions related to, well, why can't you just eliminate or get him off of of the Police Review Commission that's overseeing some of this. That's not how it's written at the moment, but I'll kind of throw it to the panelists to maybe just add, without getting personal, because Steve's not here, but talk about maybe your view of that, if you can, or the concern that you think that raises, or why this makes this more difficult or not. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Rhonda, because I know you'll have something to say.
Okay.
But let's go tight on this one.
So I go tight. I just go quick, and you got to get a lot of things in. If you want to have a nuanced conversation that goes a little deeper than the surface, you got to be able to bring up some of the, complementary issues. So I just want to say real quick that the Mental Health Resource Advisory Committee is going to have hearings for people who are interested in CIT training and giving input into that on December 13th. And so you'll need to look out for some of the details on the meetings for that. In terms of equipment, as Blaine said, the early intervention system, the early warning system is going to be critical. The other thing that's going to be critical is that community members stay on top of also giving their feedback on what type of equipment and what type of technology they want to see coming into Cleveland. I know this was a big issue during the RNC, and communities' concerns were not really addressed at that time, and we're still trying to deal with those with the Cleveland Community Police Commission in terms of trying to understand what came in, what's going to stay, what's going to be demobilized, and those kinds of issues, and then how we can use the resources that are coming in to actually bring up the police department to have the basic equipment it needs as well as to do its job, but in a way that does not, again, amount to surveillance. In terms of the question you just asked, I actually wrote in a guest column for Cleveland.com, so folks can go look at that and hear what I said. I think one of the biggest issues there is how do we move forward a community police process, community police commission process, where we're supposed to be dedicated to advancing police reform and transformation of culture when you have the support of a presidential candidate, now president-elect, that has trafficked in racist demagoguery, Islamophobia, xenophobia, sexism, and other kinds of things. You can't call it anything but that. Does that mean that every single person who followed him believes in that? No, but does that, we don't know, because we don't know all those millions of people. We do know that he trafficked in that very heavily, and that we had a police union, the CPPA, that actually endorsed that particular candidate and is now talking about trying to figure out ways to change the consent decree. I don't know what that means, but that is something that we need to definitely keep our eye on, because we need to be moving towards not just police reform, but police transformation. Police transformation, cultural transformation, systemic institutional transformation in this community. We don't want the status quo and business as usual. I don't think either one of Blaine or Deon would want that as well.
Yeah, but let's take that point that you just raised right to Blaine about the consent decree and this idea that somehow they can change it. At the moment, that is a deal between the Justice Department and the city of Cleveland. And it, at the moment, cannot be changed no matter what the rhetoric is. Okay.
Okay, Gary.
Deadlines, they filed the
No, that's different from.
those are consent decree items. Consent decree can be changed by agreement of the city and the DOJ.
Right. At the moment, neither side is. No, at the moment, neither side, because I spoke to them today, has made any changes to the consent decree as it relates. Well, nothing has been changed at the moment as related to what is on the table for them to work out as it relates to the idea of what can the presidential candidate do to change this idea of the Justice Department being involved. You are welcome to write down on a sheet of paper your question. If you have one specific, we'll try to address it.
So,
Oh, no,
Gary,
wait.
Hold on, Gary.
Please follow the rules.
Gary, just, okay, wait a minute. Hold on.
Hey, folks, this is a great example of certainly the passions that run high. Let's just chill out.
Mark, hold on. We're here having a conversation. We have different passions in the room, different concerns in the room. We have a moderator up front. We got 3 people. Gary, wait for folks to be recognized. They have cards. You don't necessarily have to tell someone to sit down and shut up. We gonna make this a civil space to have some hard conversation and some hard dialogue. The consent decree can be changed, but it has to be changed according to the appropriate protocol and process and policy that is established in the consent decree itself by paragraph 398, I think it is. But that the parties are the ones who have to agree to
Thank
change
you.
the
That is the
consent decree.
point. I'm sorry, I was not that clear.
But people can actually ask for things to be changed and or have pressure.
Sure.
Now,
And we've
will the
moved
city bucket
deadlines,
to
and
any
we
of
have
that,
done those things.
or the DOJ? They are saying they are moving forward with the consent decree, but we do not want to just say the consent decree can't be changed, because the consent decree can be changed, right? According to paragraph 398. And we also know that there are all kinds of issues if we move beyond the consent decree that we're going to have to figure out ways to deal with.
And let's give an
with
example.
with the CPPA in terms of collective bargaining,
Yeah.
in terms of arbitration, in terms of police discipline where it's needed, in terms of excessive use of force or deadly force cases. These are some of the things that we're going to have to deal with, and these are some of the things that have been articulated as not necessarily a part of, or should be part of the process, or should be discussed as part of the process. And so we're going to have to figure out ways to really deal with some of these issues, in addition to cultural change, in addition to some of the policies that we're all trying to deal with, to make sure that we have a different kind of police department, one that's culturally different, one that does not align with the kinds of attitudes that a President-elect Donald Trump has, that the CPPA endorsed, by 216 votes out of 1,200 or 1,500 and something people, mind you. Right? So I always said, anybody who's heard me speak, Blaine, Deon has probably heard me say this in meetings, I want to speak to the reform-minded police officers who really want to see some things change. And do they stand behind the CPPA vote? Because if not, I want to see them actually helping us to do something different and really stepping out so that that kind of sentiment can be put to bed. And if they're somehow behind that, then we have a whole nother struggle before us that we have to deal with.
Thank you. What I was trying to point out, and I appreciate the clarity on that, we did move things in the consent decree, because the RNC was taking up a lot of resources and time. There were things that were agreed on to slow down, and that's one of the reasons the training that Deputy Chief is talking about is back-ended here in 2017. It can't be changed without their willingness, the Justice Department and the city. And at the moment, they have not addressed the things coming out of Washington. And until that happens, the city is moving forward with the Justice Department and the Commission on the issues before them. Let's jump into another question. And this is one that I want to ask because it hasn't popped up yet, but I had a lot of interest. I wrote a little bit about it, and that is on the mayor's proposal to build an intercity bike track for dirt bike riders. And these are, would serve the people that we see on the streets riding illegally. This was very controversial when it was raised because the city is cash-strapped. How can they do this? And I want to ask Blaine, how does this tie to community policing, and why is this, in the administration's mind, a good idea? And I'll point out some of the reasons, the pushback, but let's hear from you.
Sure. Thanks, Mark, for asking that. And just as a follow-up, the administration nor the Department of Justice has agreed to any changes to the consent decree right now. So basically, we're moving forward with transformation. We're trying to change the culture. All right, so to move on to this issue about the bike trail, and everybody might be asking why that's important. How many people in here live in the city of Cleveland? Okay, a lot of you know our neighborhoods, and a lot of you are here at meetings today. Many of your neighbors and many of the disaffected communities do not come out to meetings. One of the things that we really try hard to do at the city of Cleveland is figure out how we can talk to all of the cross-sectional populations in this city of Cleveland. A lot of the young guys that are on social media, a lot of the young guys that are more likely to have confrontations with officers on the street because of the interactions that they have in the public and the areas that they frequent, often don't come to these type of settings. So what we have really tried to do is be innovative, which has been pretty much my task in working closely with several other in the police department, is to actually meet with formerly incarcerated individuals, gangbangers, guys that actually are out there on the streets that, that we have interaction with. We actually meet with some of these guys like our Peacemakers Alliance to really help us get access to disenfranchised communities and really work with, the street culture, to really get out there on the block, to get out there and talk to people in the communities, in the neighborhoods where they're at, on Buckeye, St. Clair Superior, Detroit Shoreway. Not trying to tell them to come to us. We go where they are at. And we spent a lot of time doing that throughout the years. So one of the things, when we begin to talk with a lot of these guys, and it's been my task to go out there at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning in some very interesting locations throughout the city of Cleveland that I'll let stay nameless right now, but to begin having conversations with these guys. And having conversations with a lot of these guys, one thing kept coming up. What can make us stop this violence? What can help us build better police-community relations? What can help get you involved in this system that you disdain so much? And the thing that kept coming up is dirt bike riding. Dirt bike riding, a lot of these guys tell me, was the one way that they can come together, that they don't have beefs with each other, that they don't feud with each other. They said that little do we know, but there are police officers that enjoy dirt bike riding. And since we announced this, it has opened up my eyes to a whole nother culture, that you do have police officers that ride these bikes, this bike life culture. You do have gangbangers that ride these bikes. You do have guys with street credibility. You have people of all walks of life. So as I begin to bring these guys together and have conversations, one of the things that we realized really quick is that in order for these guys to do this in a legal fashion, they have to go way out to some of these other communities like Medina and Lake County and all over the country in order to be able to do this in a legal fashion. So one of the things Mayor Jackson said is, let's look and identify if it's potential for us to try to bring this type of venue here in Cleveland to be innovative. Once we researched it, we thought that it was a no-brainer, that it's something that we should do. We have places like Baltimore that are looking at this. We have places all over the country that are now looking at this same model on how they can try to develop this type of strategy, because let's face it, everybody does not pick up a basketball for recreation. Everybody does not pick up, a football for recreation. Everybody does not run track and do the things they used to do, baseball. So I say this in closing, Mark. One of the things that I've made a point of is this city has invested in rowing sports. This city has invested in swimming pools. This city has invested in all kinds of recreational activities for skateboard parks and anybody else's hobby. Why not invest in some of these young folks so that we could try to find a way to hit the triple bottom line, which is dealing with the environment, dealing with the social causes, and also giving them an opportunity where they can learn a trade, a profession, and learn how to do small engine repair, not just on motorcycles, but also on, any small engine repair, and also have a chance to be a super sports champion that get paid millions of dollars. That's the reason why we picked up this dirt bike park.
Thank you. Couple more questions. I did get one a moment ago that said, could the moderator please take a less active role in the conversation? I appreciate the sentiment. I do try to jump in because sometimes there are questions that I can just bat down so we can get on to more deeper ones. Here's one, for example. When the city is sued, does the money come out of the taxpayers' dollars? The city is self-insured. That means they don't have an insurance company that pays settlements. So yes, that money does come out of them. And this is related to the larger issue of the police department, community policing, because obviously the costs of untrained officers is taking away from all the other things that the city's trying to do. And maybe I can throw this to Deputy Chief to talk a little bit about, I guess, back to the training, but how do you deal with the issue of lawsuits, and how is that talked about and dealt with?
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Let me touch on one thing, if I may, before I delve into the lawsuit issue, and that's the question that Dr. Rhonda took on, and that's the question of the union backing one of the political candidates. I want to make it clear that the Cleveland Division of Police has one spokesperson, and that's Chief Calvin Williams. And he may designate our PIO to deliver his message on a daily basis. But when you see a union president, whichever union it might be, standing in front of a camera and delivering a message. He's delivering a message that may not be consistent with what the chief's message to his officers might be. And I want to say that simply because I spoke at my church about a week or two ago, and that question came up as to how we deliver our message as a division. And I use this as an analogy. I said, you can almost look at the union president as a lawyer for his membership. And I know he's not a lawyer, but if you look at it in that regard, he has to say and do the things that's in the best interest of his member, whether or not that member is right or wrong. A lawyer is supposed to be on the side of the person that he represents. Well, Chief Williams doesn't operate like that. He's going to operate on the right side, regardless, on the side that the policy designates. So just keep that in mind when you do see a union president on a camera delivering a message. That's an individual message. That's not necessarily the philosophy of the division of police. Okay. With that, when we talk about lawsuits, that money does come out of the general fund, from my understanding, which takes away from anything else. And that's the reason that training is so important. When we are called into court to testify as to an officer's actions, one of the things that's brought into question is policy, or two of the things that's brought into question is policy and training. They want to look at the officers' training records, what they've done throughout their career, the different classes that they've taken and their certifications, and they want to look at the policies that were in place at the time that an incident took place. So it's very important that we get this right, and that's the reason why, surrounding this consent decree, that we're being methodical about how we look at things, about how we research the different policies that we're in the process of changing. That's why it's very, very important to get this right, because when we don't get it right, we do end up in court, and on occasion you will see a settlement as a result of it.
I'll just add, again, just echoing, this is why an early intervention system and an early warning system are really important as well, to begin to be able to tag and flag officers who have consistent issues or problems, so that you don't lose track of that. So 5 years down the road, you don't know something happened 2 years ago, 2 years before that, 2 years before that. That you have some kind of consistent process of tracking that, and then and trying to make an intervention. The other thing I want to say that's really important, that builds on what Deon just said, is that, do you mind me calling you Deon instead of Deputy Chief? Is that recruitment and hiring is also critical, right? What is the recruitment policy? What's the criteria for hiring, right? Oh, okay. So I think those are really critical. Who are we bringing on the force? Why do they want to be on the force? What are their motivations for being on the force? What kinds of things do they have in their jacket before they come on the force? What kind of investigations are we doing? Those kinds of things are extremely important. Having diversity of persons on the force, and we all know that just because you have diversity, this is not the lowest common denominator, right? Just because you have somebody that looks like me doesn't mean you automatically gonna get somebody that thinks like me, whatever that me is, and whatever the thinking is. But diversity of persons, commitment to serving and protecting, right? To some of the cultural and value value goals that I think are extremely important, and human dignity and respect. Right? It's not just about, I want to go arrest me some folks and throw them in jail kind of folks. I mean, we need, there are, people out there who may need arresting and putting in jail. But is that the impetus that is making you go on the force, right? Versus serving and protecting. So even how we think about those things in terms of establishing those policies are important. The other thing that I think is important too is redoing the disciplinary matrix. For the Cleveland Division of Police, which is a part of the consent decree, and is also something that the Cleveland Community Police Commission is supposed to have a role in and some say in, and some input in, and the community itself through us, to really kind of transform what that matrix looks like. Because one of the issues has been, in terms of what I've been told and what one could say community has seen, is that oftentimes you have an example of how someone was treated 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 2 years ago, whatever. And so then when you have somebody new come on, you have to grandfather it, equal kinds of treatment based on what some of those other people got based on the comparison of the case. So there needs to be a transformation as well of the disciplinary matrix that no longer allows that kind of grandfathering and allows for that to happen within the kind of transformation process and the cultural shift process around bias-free and other kinds of things that will hold police accountable. So accountability is extremely important, and transparency. So I can't say enough to invite everyone to come out to the Cleveland Community Police Commission meetings. We want as many people in the room as possible. We want different faces. We want diverse faces. We want the same faces, the people who are committed to actually giving us their input so that we can take that forward and have some say in what these policies look like, what the programs look like, and the cultural shift looks like.
Mark, before we move off of this, I want to make sure that I bring in some policy issues that we've done with the city of Cleveland, because first and foremost, everybody is right. Understanding urban communities and having problem-solving community policing is very critical. And talking with a lot of the commanders, a lot of people, came straight to the police department straight from the military. So they took on a mindset of having a paramilitary type of attitude that they brought that culture into the workspace. Well, it's clear that when you're dealing with problem and community-solving issues, that it's good to also have that, not just have just the paramilitary or the military mindset when you come into a police department, but also have people that are able to look at community solutions and actually be able to do community solving. So trying to get the right people, and you're going to hear me say that quite often, get in front of the right people to make sure that they get the message, not talk to the choir like I mentioned with the dirt bike park, but then also making sure that we recruit the right people into the police department. So now what we have done with the city of Cleveland was we have a recruitment unit that's going to recruit all year round, that is always going to be going to colleges, universities, historical black universities, Hispanic venues and churches, and really try to have an aggressive recruitment process, not to say 2 months before a test, we're going to want you to come and sign up for the police department, but actually do it in advance. Then last but not least, I really would tell you that we also changed a law, which is now it used to be 1 in 3, and I got to explain this. It's kind of interesting, but I want to explain it best I can real quick. It used to be when you took a test, you had a 1 in 3 process. So bear with me. Out of a person to take a test, it'll be 100 people that will meet the grade, and they will be ranked from 1 through 100. Now, before it used to be, you had to choose 1 out of the top 3. Out of the civil service exam, out of those rankings. Then let's say if you pick 3, you pick the 3rd person because you didn't think that the 1st or the 2nd person was the best person for the job, and you picked the 3rd person. Number 4 would then get bumped up in the civil service. Then your next round of the next person that you hire, you would have to hire from 1, 2, and 4. That has changed because of the law that we changed for civil service, and we had to go to the voters in order to make that change, and we made that change last year to now is 1 in 10. Now we can actually have more leverage on looking at how we get the right person for that police department. So now you can pick anybody from 1 through 10. So if the 8th person is the best person that has the educational background, the diversity, the urban experience, which is critical, making sure that you get people that worked in rec centers, work with youth in neighborhoods, come up through the neighborhoods, that really understand the culture that they're trying to police. You now have more leverage to get and flexibility to hire the people that you want. But last but not least, it is the most frustrating thing, and I'm pretty sure Deputy Chief McCaulley can say this as well, is when, and I'll just speak for myself. I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, when there was a culture of don't be a police officer. You don't want to be a police officer for whatever reason. That was, at least I grew up in the neighborhood, that's what a lot of people really pounded at me. Don't trust the police. It had songs called F the Police, et cetera, et cetera. And I will tell you that the most frustrating thing is that have people discourage young folks to try to be a police officer. If you want to be part of the solution, you need to recruit these young folks to be part of that. I don't like going to rec centers that are in predominantly African-American and Hispanic communities and have lines full of people coming from the suburbs that want to be police officers in our own community. We need to have our own taking these tests to be police officers.
I want to be responsive to the questions, so I'm glad we took off on that point. I have at least 4 questions about police hiring, and 2 of them were pegged to the officer involved in the Tamir Rice shooting, and you can go read plenty about that and his background from the suburban, had problems in the suburban department, and then wound up in Cleveland. So I'm glad they did talk about it. I would give Deputy Chief the final word on that point of training and recruiting, because it is a recurring question. You know, what are you doing now to make sure you are getting a better vetted officer?
Okay, and Blaine did an excellent job explaining it. When I was in, the commander of community police and recruitment was under my command, and one of the most frustrating things that I had to do was to go out into communities of color and try to recruit. Like Blaine said, we would go into barbershops, into recreation centers, into places, and what we would be met with is, I don't want to be a police officer. But they didn't have an affection for the police at all. And I'm telling them, if you are going to change anything, you have to be involved in it. You have to become a part of it. And it was just so frustrating that I would ask them if they were, some were college educated, some didn't have a job at that particular time, but they were not interested in becoming police officers until we would have conversations about what it was like to grow up in a neighborhood of color like myself in the Glenville neighborhood, and then make a difference in the neighborhood that I came from. I was on occasion successful in changing their minds and having them sign up, and I'm sure some of them became police officers. But again, as you go back into the neighborhood, take that message that it's very important that we have sign-ups. Some of the things that we are doing recently, we've changed our recruitment process significantly. Just as recently as today, we have a new personal history statement that's been revised, been looked at very, very thoroughly, that we give to our candidates so that we can take an in-depth look at their history and make sure that they're truthful and make sure that they're the type of police officer that we want. But to Blaine's point as well, is that we don't necessarily have to go down that list in order, because we know that people that might perform well on a written test may not have the social skills needed to interact with the public. So this gives us an opportunity to get an in-depth look at an individual and say, well, that person might have scored number 2 or 3 or 4 on the test and had 100%, but that person lacks the skills that we need or the skills that we want to work in an urban environment. So we do have a little latitude because of the law being changed in order to select the best candidates that we think will serve our communities best.
Thank you. Here's a question. It kind of flips this whole question. So what should we expect from members of the community as it relates to police? You know, we've been talking a lot about, what we're trying to change in terms of culture, interaction, training. We'll start with you, Blaine. But what do you expect of residents of Cleveland and how they interact with police?
First of all, change is not a spectator sport. You can't sit back and be an armchair quarterback and talk about what needs to be changed. You actually have to get out there in the game. There are several venues for you to get involved. I know Dr. Williams talked about the Community Police Commission. That's definitely something that we support. We also have, meetings that we have in each district every month. We have block and street clubs that people are involved in. So one of the things that and I don't want to divert from your question, Mark, but I got to say this, and I got to say it in my own way, so please excuse me. But one of the biggest things and one of the biggest heartbreaks that I've ever had is when I watched on Imperial Avenue when 11 women were found dead at the hands of Anthony Sowell. And the first thing that I asked myself is, wow, this community, are we apathetic? Do we care anymore? Are we actually looking, are we our brothers and sisters keeper? And are we just going through the motions? Are we ignoring neighbors? Are we not involved? Are we not I ask myself all these questions because I take my job seriously, and I ask myself these questions. What could I have done? So what I tell community members is that, one, you got to show up. Leadership shows up. Leadership shows up at all the meetings. Leadership is coming and engaging in forums like this. Leadership has hard conversations. It may be times when you may not disagree. You brought up Steve Loomis earlier. I would tell you that I've had some fervently some fervent arguments with Steve Loomis. But I will also tell you that Steve and I have also come to some agreement on how we can move some things forward on a couple of things, and really have him talk to a room full of officers and say, hey, you guys need to stand down on certain things as well. That's a part that people don't see. So you got to be able to interface and interact even with people who you don't agree with. You got to be able to come to the table and not say it's either my way or the highway, because in the business that we're in, there's a million different opinions out here, and opinions, everybody got them. So what I say is that what I expect out of the community is to be involved, be engaged, hold everybody accountable, make sure that the people that say that they're going to do certain things are not just giving lip service, and make sure that most and foremost that we actually care and not just be apathetic and not and just give up and say that's somebody else's job to make reform and change.
I want to echo getting involved. The Cleveland Community Police Commission's website is www.clecpc.org, and we list our meetings on there, our locations. You can see what our work groups are. Our work groups are open to the public. Our full commission meetings are open to the public. You can give us feedback online. You can email me. You can email commissioners. You can come to our town halls. There are all kinds of ways you can get involved, because one of the critical things that we are tasked with is making sure that we get community input and feedback so that we are advancing and enhancing, I'm going to say, civilian oversight into the Cleveland Division of Police, so that the community has some say about how it is being policed, and is not just expected to take what is being given to it, but to actually have some proactive say in terms of those policies. So I would echo that, www.clecpc.org. The other thing I want to say is that there are so many people in community, and I know it's unfortunate and heart-wrenching and sad feeling when you say you have to become a part of the police department, you have to help change the paradigm, or you have to help change what's happening. But as one of my colleagues would say, you also have to change the paradigm, which means that people don't necessarily want to join something they feel does not have their best interests at heart, and that by joining they will only further their feeling. I'm not saying that they will only further kind of the policing that is not helping their communities and be seen as quote unquote working against their own community. And so, the things that we have to think about is how we do all these things like recruitment and hiring. How do we make sure we're getting the right types of persons, so that then we have, you can open up to more folks saying, well, maybe I want to be a part of that. But the other thing for me goes back to where I started at the top of this conversation is, how do we engage in a transformation of culture and a transformation of actually how we police in communities so that we don't need as many police, right? Because what I ultimately want to see is less police necessary in my community, right? And I've heard some people say we need to develop alternative systems of safety that are not necessarily beholden to having police engaged, right? And this means that those of us in community have to also be able to vision a community and solutions that would allow us to have less of a need for police in our communities, as well as transform the ways that policing is done in communities so that people feel that they want to be a part of something that, if it exists, could actually have some positive impact on their neighborhoods.
We have just 2 minutes left, and I wanted to ask Deputy Chief to respond to this question. It touches on a little bit of the last two questions, is how can we implement a program that connects police with their communities, and it underlines on the ground?
I don't want y'all seeing all my business.
Sorry about that.
We just gonna shut this down. Boom. Will that work? Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Mark, if I heard you correctly,
secret stuff on there.
FBI's already in it.
Mark, the question again was how can
we, so this is from the perspective of an audience or community member, implement a program that connects the police with their communities? Like essentially, how can we get them to maybe participate in an organization or some kind of activity that we've got going?
Very, very good question. Let me start out with an example of what we do in order to get police officers involved. Most of our communities, at least in the city of Cleveland, have some type of community festival. And in the past, and I'll speak from my commander seat when I was commander of the 4th District before my promotion. In the past, what our officers would do is they would see themselves as there to protect the public. Of course, they would be there to block an intersection or to make sure that things didn't go awry. Well, that was a tremendous community policing opportunity that was being lost. For an officer to sit in a car and make sure that an intersection was blocked when a car itself could sit there and that officer can go out and mingle with the public. So what we started to do was to get the officers more involved. Instead of sitting in cars at festivals, they would get out and they would start to line dance and take selfies and things that seem simple, but these are interactions that happen. These are community policing interactions that were happening that were breaking down the barriers that exist between our department and the public that we serve. So my answer to how do you get the officer involved is just to approach the officer, plain and simple. When you see him out there on the street, when you see him involved in his enforcement activities, take a moment just to say hello and break that barrier down. Take just a moment to introduce yourself and let that officer know what your concerns are and have him be a part of whatever solution you need in order to make your situation better. Our officers are supposed to be engaging. That's part of the training that we talked about. They're supposed to approach you and speak to you and say hello. But I don't think that it takes a program in order to get an officer involved. Every interaction that he has is an opportunity to be a good community policing interaction. And that's what we seek to have when we talk about community policing within the city of Cleveland. Now, the last thing I want to say is this, there's an old saying that I say all the time, and that is trust is gained in droplets and lost in buckets. And we understand that we've lost a couple buckets of trust in the Cleveland Division of Police. But the droplets that we seek to regain from you to get that trust back is new training, is better interactions, is a professional police force, is accountability, is transparency. These are the droplets that's going to accumulate and to get you to trust us as a division again. And to go back to the previous question that you had, the expectations of residents, is just to give us an opportunity to earn your trust again and to be patient with us as we move forward.
All right. I want to end with just some fun quote here to think about. This was from 1994. Former Mayor Michael R. White asked about community policing, and he said the following. In the old days, you wanted a police officer to shoot straight and shoot fast. Today's realities call for not straight shooters, but straight thinkers. People who can solve problems, who can relate to the public, professionals who can handle the streets. Thank you for your participation, the passions too, and anytime you can keep me in check is good too.